a small switch, because this is going to take very little time. The infill item, we're going to move to the top of the agenda. That will take a short period of time. Then we will devote time to the short-term rentals. So, Travis, go.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll try to keep this brief. So at your last committee meeting,
Thank you.
There was discussion about the residential infill study, and staff had 3 points that we wanted to raise for the committee's attention. 2 of those points you've already addressed today. So the measurement of height and the front setback for infill, you already authorized a text change. So that's good news. The third part was about modifying grade on an infill situation. And what staff did was met with some representatives of the Home Builders Association. We talked about all 3 points, and from staff's perspective, it was a very positive discussion. We had good input that was provided by the HBA representatives, and believe that we've got a good path forward. We'd like to continue the conversation with the HBA. If the committee would like to consider authorizing a text change, we could have that conversation in public in front of the Planning Commission. And that third piece there is just looking at how we modify grade and measure height in an infill setting. So happy to take any questions. I know Suzanne Harris is here as well if you'd like to hear from her.
Okay, Suzanne, I know that you all have talked as we asked at the last meeting. Are you okay with, or good with the movement where we're heading?
Yes, we had a chance to meet with Travis, I think, since the information.
Can you come up so the clerk can,
And they can hear on TV
Yeah.
as well.
Sorry, I'm still used to it being in the middle. Could have gone the other way, it would have been faster. Suzanne Harris, 5580 Centerview Drive, Raleigh. I'm with the Home Builders Association, and yes, we did have an opportunity to meet with Travis. I believe the timeline of it was after the language that you have in front of you had already been sent to you. So I think that's maybe reflected in his comments about the ability to continue conversations. We did offer some suggestions and some additional input that could potentially alter the language a little bit, but I think it's heading in the correct direction. One thing that was not in there that would be nice to also consider is the sidewall height issue. And as Travis mentioned, going in and talking about the grading side of things and where things are measured from.
Okay.
So thank you.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Okay, so Travis, you need a motion to move forward with the text change.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay,
Mayor, Chair, I move that we authorize staff to proceed with the text change as presented.
second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, passes 3-1. Let's see, the next is short-term rentals, what you all have been waiting for. Again, thank you for your patience. As I said, we had some very extensive stuff today, so really appreciate you hanging in there with us. We're going to start with a presentation by Travis, and then open up questions from the committee members. And then after we go through this, if there's anybody who would like to speak, we'll see how many of you want to speak. You might really like what we move forward with. If you don't, well, then you'll have an opportunity to speak on that. So having said that, we might, based on how many people want to speak, I might limit it to 2 minutes per person, but let's worry about that when we get there, and we'll go with Travis for now.
Thank you again. Good afternoon. So I don't have a structured presentation for you. At your last meeting, you saw a good recap of the history for the idea of short-term rentals that takes us back to 2014. What we did talk about was the adoption of the homestay ordinance, which happened last year, and that really was the starting point or the launching point for the direction that you provided to staff at the last meeting. So our interpretation of your direction was to look at the ordinance that was recently adopted, and then consider drafting an ordinance that dealt with whole house rental. There were some guardrails that were placed on the direction about having life safety issues addressed in the ordinance, and very basic permitting functions. So what staff did was take a look at the homestay ordinance that was adopted and essentially use that as a template to start the modification. So what you have in your backup packet represents that first attempt. There is no authorization for a text change that has occurred yet. That's what staff is seeking from this committee, is whether or not you'd like to move forward. So the ordinance that you have in front of you is essentially the homestay ordinance with a couple of provisions that were removed. And the basic points of the removal were related to the resident manager. So if you're thinking about short-term rental and you're thinking about whole house rental, typically you're not going to have a resident manager component to it. So that language from homestay was removed, and language was updated to reference a new use that would be introduced into the code. So the intent behind this ordinance was to repeal the homestay ordinance and replace it with what we're calling short-term rental, and using the basic framework of that previous ordinance. So obviously this is a starting point for the discussion. Staff is happy to take any direction or questions that you might have at this point. If you would like to advance the conversation, it would take an authorization for a text change. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, so I had two questions, and I think these are important distinctions. First, in I, it says the premise shall not be used for live, work, an accessory dwelling unit, or daycare home. Can you explain that?
Sure. Again, this is language that was pulled straight out of the homestay ordinance. So if you don't like any of that or a portion of it, that language can be stricken. If you'd like to supplement that language, that could be added to as well.
So live, work.
Live work is the practice of using your home as a limited business. So in the parlance of the UDO, we have two flavors. The first is home occupation. Think of a tax accountant that works from the home. There are no people that come to visit. You sit in an office and work on a computer and maybe make phone calls. Live work is a little bit more substantial. Think about a hairdresser where you're actively receiving clients and you've got people coming to and from your house on a regular basis, and you can also employ outside people as employees. So it's a little bit more intensive of a use. But again, if the committee so chooses, those provisions can be stricken.
So accessory dwelling unit, I guess that was also taken, that language was taken?
From the homestay ordinance, yes, ma'am.
I'll say, I think just the original intent of it was, did you want to have, how much intensity do you want to have in the house? And then with the ADUs, the question was, did you want to reserve those for long-term renters? That would be the question that you want to answer. And if you say, we don't care whether ADUs are reserved for long-term renters, then that part would come out. And if you are fine with the intensity of the use being a short-term rental with a live, work, and daycare at the same time, that's fine too. But those are the questions that you're answering.
Okay, so the issue I would have would be with the accessory dwelling units. Certainly with live, work, and daycare home, I understand that aspect of it. But accessory dwelling unit, I would say to strike that.
Well, it also, I agree. Yeah, what do we call you in committee? Are you chair or mayor? Mayor, chair, mayor?
Notorious.
There we go. Notorious chair. Okay. I agree, because it under E1, where we define short-term rental, the second sentence as a portion or the entire dwelling unit can be used for lodging, including part or all of an accessory structure.
Right.
So there's something not congruent here.
And
so I'm with the mayor on that piece. I mean, I have other comments too, but on this, I'm in agreement.
That's a good comment. So that's new language that was not contained in the homestay ordinance.
So that was the addition of, if we're gonna, this is how you would propose defining short-term rental.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it was the realization that rental might happen in a detached garage or a detached structure that wasn't present before.
Okay.
So we need to
Wasn't an
rectify that.
AD Oh, yeah, that
Go ahead.
wasn't an ADU.
That's right.
So that was a question that had come up was, can I rent my garage out if it's just got a bedroom and a
That's right.
bath? Or just has a bedroom? Does that, and
Okay.
so that was to clarify that. So they're kind of inconsistent, but not totally.
Understood.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, under this as well, people could rent out a full house or number of rooms in their house.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. The other question I have, and I'll open up to all of you, sorry, I don't mean to be hogging the questions here. I've just been working on this for 5 years. So, C, cooking facilities are not permitted in any bedroom, but whatnot. How does that apply, say, to ADUs or whatnot? Can I get some clarification on
Sure.
that language?
That's a great question. So the original intent behind that language was for a partial rental that you wouldn't have separate cooking facilities within a bedroom. Understand how that regulation might work differently in, say, a studio apartment rental. The intention behind the language was certainly not to prevent the opportunity to have cooking facilities in a studio or in an accessory dwelling unit. So that language can be clarified if that's the direction that the committee wants to go in.
So you're just, I mean, I would say a safety rule would be a bedroom in a house.
That's right.
You wouldn't have a kitchen operating.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you just clarify, like, make sure that's clarified?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anybody, oh, and then the other thing I wanted to ask, it appears there's a 3 strikes and you're out rule here.
Yes, ma'am.
So I like that. And then if you get to that 3rd strike, you can't apply for a permit for another 365 days.
That's correct.
Okay. What are the penalties? I saw that it referred to another section, but
Right.
what would the penalty be for a first-time violation, a second-time violation, and then the third-time violation?
So there's no escalation, if that's what you're asking for penalties. It would just follow the normal zoning violation penalty, which is a $100 administrative fee plus a $100 fine. And then if you enter into a state of noncompliance for a longer period of time, say more than 30 days, then that goes up to $500 a day.
Okay. And then my final question, on the, let me see here. Let me just find this. Of course, I don't have my glasses on. I have another question. I can't find it. I don't have my glasses with me. So, darn. Anyhow, so I'm going to open it up to you, and I'll try and find what I was trying to find. Oh, I know what it was. What is the fee for the permit?
So this was carried over from the homestay ordinance, and again, it's something that can be changed. Section 4 states that the initial permit's $172, and then an annual renewal of $86. I know those sound like weird numbers. They were culled from our fee index, and again, that could be tied to a standard zoning permit fee or something like that.
Well, we want something to cover administrative cost, but that seems a little, well, would it be possible to do something where if it's a full house rental, it's X amount
Sure.
versus you're renting a room?
Yeah, it might be interesting to look at a scaled fee depending on the type of, the amount of rooms or something along those lines, kind of the.
Well, it may be that, what did you say that was, 172?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe that's for a full house, or, I don't know, or, but maybe it's $50 for renting a room, something like that.
That's certainly something we could explore through the drafting process when we look at the fee schedule.
And can we look at what other cities do?
From a fee standpoint?
Yes,
Absolutely.
please. Thank you.
Yep.
And can we also have this be online?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
On the
Mr.
fee,
Bumpkin?
Travis, I'd like to see it commensurate with the amount of work that's involved in reviewing these. if you could take a look at the fee from that angle as well.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. So this may be getting a little technical, but I'm looking at the definition.
You're an attorney.
That's right where I go, yeah. So the first sentence, a dwelling unit that can be used for overnight lodging accommodations that are provided to transients for no longer than 30 days for compensation. I think I understand what you mean is not longer than 30 days of consecutive stay.
That's correct.
So I don't see a limit on the total number of days that a short-term rental could be rented out during a year.
That's correct.
That's not in here.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think that's important to maintain the spirit of these owner rented out. You know, the spirit of Airbnb and VRBO is the owner, the host is renting out their own property. So I think that's important. I've heard from some folks that don't do it that way, and I know that that would be
Say that again?
a total limit on the number of days that the unit can be rented out during a year.
So, during the year?
Yeah.
For the
Like-
whole property. So that was
Yeah, we
something
talked about this
that we
at the
discussed
committee meeting.
That's right.
And we talked about other cities do things like 180 days.
Right. So, and that's a good memory. During the committee conversation, I think the reference that I gave was San Francisco used to have a standard where they provided a maximum number of days that a property could be rented out for, and it was 275 days. That represents essentially 3/4 of the year, with the thought that for the other 25% of the year, the property owner would be domiciled in the property. The challenge with having a total number of days, however, is in the enforcement. So having a number in the ordinance is easy, and I'll be honest, we can pick a number, whatever we want that number to be. But what that means is there has to be continual, for lack of a better term, surveillance on the property for staff to understand whether or not a property has been used for that total number of days. And that either happens in person, it happens with some sort of online portal, and just becomes a challenge from an enforcement standpoint.
Well, wouldn't part of it be, don't we get some kind of information back from the permit holders about what they've done?
I
thought I saw something.
rem-
So there is a requirement for the short-term rental host to maintain a log of people
Yeah.
that stay. That's, in speaking with the attorney's office, that's not something that we can require them to produce for us without a warrant, because that's protected information. It's there in case we need to use it for law enforcement purposes.
But if they agree to it in the permit, haven't they waived their, hasn't the permit,
there
I mean,
have
it's a
been-
condition of the permit. You're going to provide the city information about what you're doing.
Well, there have been cases where if you require people, if you're the owner, to reveal their name, their address, all that kind of stuff, that you would need a warrant for it. I think you could probably say how many days you're rented for a year. You just don't you can't get the personal information. The reason that we ask them to keep it is because there might be a situation where there is probable cause to get that information. But that's pretty standard that we couldn't write that in. Now, could you say you can rent it, 100 days a year and tell us, what days that you rented it? I think that's fine, as opposed to name, address, social security number, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's fine. I don't care who
Right.
was staying
And
there.
I think that
I was more interested in the total number of days. And to just put a finer point on it, I've heard from a lot of people that are worried that their neighborhood's going to be filled with zombie houses, that no one actually lives there, and it's not anybody's home. They feel like that's going to be damaging to their neighborhoods. I know that the folks that engage in this activity are concerned about those kind of limits. This is early in the process. I'd like to see it continue to be part of the conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the next draft, but if it was a topic that was discussed as it went forward, that I think maybe would bring some helpful guidance from the community back to us.
Patrick, could I just remind you of something we discussed last time? There have been 55 complaints over 5 years. Is that right?
Give or take.
55 complaints. This is not, the data suggests this is not an issue. However, deal with the concern you have. We can always ask the staff to come back to us and say 6 months and give us a report. This is what's happening, blah, blah, blah. The one thing I think most people are concerned about is corporations coming in and buying up houses and selling, and if we see that as a trend, then we address it. But at a 6-month interval, we can also look at the number of complaints, see how that's trending. We can look at if there's any people who have hit the 3 strikes and you're out rule. But we can make data-driven decisions instead of fear-driven decisions. And that's what I would encourage us to do.
If
Well,
I
I'm
may,
willing
if
to-
I may.
Oh, pardon me.
Can he finish, Councilor Cox, and
Sure.
then you?
Well, I'm willing to stay flexible on it and give it a try. It'd be my preference to try it the other way first and then back up a little bit if we needed, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
I would say one thing that's important, I think, is that the way it's set up is you do a yearly permit. So you don't have the non-conforming use forever. So, you know, if you wanted to change the rules after a year, then you could wipe the slate clean, if you will.
Sorry, I took a sip of water, Councilor Cox.
Okay. Well, first of all, I support what Councilor Buffkin is suggesting, and I don't think it's a reaction out of fear. I think it's a reasonable request that we track the dates when these units are rented out, and that we put a limit on the number. I mean, that's the spirit of this thing, is for people to be able to rent out their homes in order to earn some additional income. People do not want to have hotels in their permanent hotels in their neighborhoods, and but I think if there are some limits on the number of days in a year that particularly whole house and can be rented out, then I think that's very worthy of further discussion and incorporation into the text change.
Mr. Martin?
Is that?
I'm done.
And I think that I'm in agreement with both of you that it's sort of nuanced, and I think around the whole house rental piece in particular, where I want to push the conversation both with staff, but I also see some Verbo reps in the audience, so thank you for coming, is the companies that run these platforms are willing to talk with us and work with us. And so I don't know that we need to rely on the person providing the service in the community, but can we, and I think I said this at the last committee meeting, but can we work with the actual provider to say, here, you have the list of the people in the city. Can you give us a spreadsheet? We don't need names and address, but like if there's an ID number and it corresponds to your list in planning or zoning and code enforcement, and we can validate who has met the number of days and who has exceeded it, then we're not having to do the enforcement issues. And that's more for whole house than for folks that I think are renting out a room or two. But the enforcement piece is the most difficult. And so I hear that, but I think that if that's the road that we want to go down, then we have to go to the actual provider. I don't know that we're going to solve that kind of here,
Sure.
So.
And there are other third-party solutions that could be helpful in identifying when units are rented. I know of 2 companies that are essentially internet scrapers that can provide information to us for a fee.
So another question, could we also ask Airbnb and VRBO and any other groups to let their members know that they are required to register?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So they're working with us. I think that that's important as well. And I
Let's
also,
get the zoning permit as opposed to registration.
yeah, okay, good. So a zoning permit, whatnot. Any other questions right now before I open it up for public comment? Okay, who would like to, who would like to speak on this issue? Like, raise your hands. Let me see how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I'm going to do is 2 minutes, if you don't mind. And, you know, you've heard the comments we've made. I think there's consensus on the committee to move forward, taking out the language of ADUs here. We have clarification on the stoves. We know that there's a 3 strikes and you're out rule. We know what the penalties are. We're going to come back with an idea of what the fee would be for the zoning permit, and then if there's anything else you'd like to address. So what I'm going to ask you to do is line up on this side, and that way everybody's organized. You want music playing? You could sing. So what I'm going to ask to line up 2 minutes each. We give your name and address for the record, for the clerk, and try not to repeat what the person in front of you just said. You know, you can always say ditto. But anyhow, but we do want to hear from all of you standing. So thank you very much. And we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mayor, and it's a pleasure to meet you again.
Thank you.
My name is Monica Nelson. This is my husband, John Nelson. Hello. And we live at 925 Edgewater Drive in Garner, North Carolina. So your question may be, why am I here? And many of you Airbnb pros, Superhost as well, may be interested to know that on February 11th, we were the first Airbnb home to be granted a Wake County permit for operating our Airbnb. We're the only ones in the county. So we are not in the city of Raleigh, but I was born and raised in Raleigh. I love Raleigh. And I know that the UDO for Wake County is currently under revision as well, because on February 11th, even though we are a 5-bedroom entire home rental, and we actually live in the basement, a 1,200 square foot basement, to supplement my husband's income for a restaurant that we started 3 years ago on the border of Raleigh and Garner, minutes from here. With you're talking about fees, we paid approximately $300 or $350 when we found out that we were in violation, which we did not know. We thought we were safe because we had heard all about what was going on in the city of Raleigh. We were not. We received notification in August that we were in violation. We had to hire an attorney, Mr. John Burns. Very thankful for him. But he walked us through the appeal process, and then we had to pay $800 fee for a special use permit. And that's the only fee we have. That's it. And we were granted our permit, but unfortunately the current UDO language does not define an entire house, so we were restricted to 2 bedrooms, 4 baths.
And you're working with the county on that?
Yes. I know I'm up on my 2 minutes, but there's some things I'd like to see in the language of the change of the UDO.
Okay,
that
so
you're
what I'm
working
going to do is add a minute, and then everybody else gets 3 minutes.
on? Okay, thank you. Okay, hurry
But
up.
please don't exceed the minute, all right?
Yes, ma'am. So transient. Transient, I don't like the definition. I know it's been used in some cities like New York that like to send their homeless down to North Carolina. But the thing is, transient does not describe the people that came to my home. I have had families that came for weddings, graduations. They were able to spend time together in the home. So transient is not a proper definition to describe my Airbnb property. I even had FBI agents come and stay. Zoning, one-time fee. That's what we have. Gatherings. I'm now terrified to have any guest at my home because, like the zoning or the planning office suggested, 24-hour surveillance. Unfortunately, the cop across the street that's a Raleigh PD officer does have my home under 24-hour surveillance. After obtaining our permit on February the 11th, he called the cops on me 2 days later during the rainstorm when my dog got away. So now I already have 1 violation.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you to the council for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Joe Kessler. I live at 315 Bledsoe Avenue, 27601. I know it's been a long day for everybody. I'll keep my remarks brief. I'm here as a homeowner in Raleigh, an Airbnb aspiring host. I want to speak briefly on an aspect of short-term rental, which I think is frequently overlooked. I think it's one of the most effective ways to showcase our city to potential new residents. I don't think this is something that's disagreed upon by any large majority on the council, but I do want to talk specifically about the 3 strikes policy, the language that's in there. It's very broad as it currently exists, and if we're talking about a situation where you could have a person who is a resident of the home for, say, 180 days out of the year, and they're renting it for the other 180 days. It's not clear to me that, and maybe following up briefly on what the other speaker said, that a violation unrelated to the rental of the home, for example, by some of the neighbors that might not be super thrilled to have an Airbnb, whether or not there have been problems, Mayor, as you pointed out, there really haven't been by the data, but somebody who doesn't like the idea of folks that they don't know staying in the home next to them, could they, for example, file a complaint for an escaped dog, for something not related to the rental of the property that then ends up as a code violation? That counts against the Airbnb permit. For me, that would just be a concern or something for the council to potentially consider. On the subject of
So what you're really saying then is you want to make sure that if you could stop the clock, thank you. What you're really saying then is you want to make sure that the violation cited actually relates to the guest. So in other words, if there's a noise complaint, if there's disruption, if somebody's holding a party, as opposed to somebody's dog escapes.
Right. Effectively, I think that there's a lot of situations, as an Airbnb host of a whole house rental, you may or may not be able to control somebody having a party. But I think we all understand there's a joint responsibility to
That's right.
to do what we can to affect that. So I'm not asking for an abolishment of those criteria, but just maybe a more specific definition that says, hey, are you being cited for something that happened while you were at the residence that has no import on Airbnb, such as the situation that was just referenced. I don't think that would necessarily be widespread, but while we're discussing it, might not be amiss to include some language like that, or just a narrowing of the definitions of the things that would count as a strike. That's really my only comment here. I think that this is an opportunity, as you mentioned, to approach this not from a perspective of trying to figure out all of the things that could possibly go wrong with this, but look at it as an opportunity for the city to show what it is like to live, work, and play here, which is, I think, what we all want, an opportunity to put our best foot forward as a city. So that's the remainder of my time. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Justice Peters, and I live at 1318 Lorimer Road in District D. And I purchased the property in 2003 and have lived there pretty much the whole time since then, except in 2019 when my life took me on some long travels with an unknown end date, and wanting to be able to return to Raleigh when I finished, I covered my mortgage by renting my whole house on Airbnb. And I'd like my story to be balanced with, I also don't want my neighborhood to get turned into a bunch of zombie homes, but as you're considering an upper limit on the number of days in a year, consider someone like me who might not know if I'll be back within a year, who wants to keep their house but doesn't want to rent it. Like, I liked the option that I could take my house off of Airbnb at any time and move back in, instead of having to terminate a lease with a one-year tenant. Just to comment on the people who stayed there, it was primarily people who, because I had a minimum of a week, it was primarily people who were looking to move into their new home. They'd purchased a home in Raleigh or Cary and wanted a bridge home to be able to then become a resident in the area. Those were the ones that stayed the longest. Other than that, it was people who were in the area doing work at the university on houses in the area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Sauls. I live at 3010 Grant Avenue. I attended 2 of the meetings from the previous committee. I thought it was a bit of a sham. Those of us who were in the public were not allowed to speak at these meetings, but the people that were running the meetings had no idea how Airbnb works. So I left that, and I was I understood that the ordinance that was passed was then rescinded. I was certainly glad to hear that. I started my Airbnb on April 1st. I have an Airbnb for the one reason that I need the money. I need the money to pay my taxes, to pay my solid waste bill, and so on. I'm retired, and I live on Social Security and my pension from local government. So I need a few extra bucks. Now, it just happens to have turned out that my clients have become, and guests have become more long-term, and that's working, that's very nice. My price structure encourages that. I have had 2 guests that came and stayed for 7 weeks. That's longer than 30 days or 1 month. Those people were fresh out of college, and one of them had a job and one of them was looking. That worked out very well for them. My next guest after them, the second guest after them were 2 Chinese girls that came to study in the forestry school for a 3-month period. Again, longer than this rather arbitrary 1-month limitation that y'all are talking about. And finally, I have guests now that want to come and stay in my place for 1 month so they can find an apartment or townhouse to live in, because in one case, Omar is an IT specialist and he has a job, and another fella, Ashish, is looking at my place now for the next month, because he too already has a job and is looking for a place to live. So in both of these cases, they're looking for 1 month. I think, and that obviously makes it clear that I have an objection to a 1-month limitation. I don't see any reason for it. I think we've gotten down in the weeds on this whole Airbnb thing and short-term rentals. There should be just 2 issues here. Possibly 3, but I'm going to talk about the first 2. The first one should be that the city interferes with a homeowner's. I want 1 more minute.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
I do have a
Could the
question for
city
this.
attorney-
If I'm,
They have a question, so if you can just bear with us for a
Yeah.
second.
Could
sir,
the city attorney clarify that if you have a stay longer than 30 days, that it's perfectly legal?
Yes, that's just a long-term rental. The idea of the 30 days or less is it becomes like a lodging as opposed to just renting your house. So if it's past 30 days, it's just considered a residential long-term lease. So this isn't limiting your ability to rent it over 30 days. You can do that. This only applies to the regulations only apply to the shorter term. So there are no restrictions on that. It's the same as any other rental property.
I think there's only 2 issues. One of them is that the property owner should not be interfered with. And the second one is that Airbnb should not contribute to the homeless problem or the lack of home affordability.
Right. So you snuck in your.
Yes,
your
I
other-
did.
that was very good.
I caught that, you know. That was a sly move, but I got you.
Before you go, could I ask you a question, sir? Are you doing whole house, or you're living in the house while you rent out?
I live in the house, and I
Thank
think
you.
that's the way it should be.
Thanks. I appreciate that clarification.
Not cutting in line, someone was nice enough to hold my spot for me, but Eric Braun, 3316 Rock Creek Drive. as most of you know, I was on the planning commission for 6 years, and this came before us. The only thing in doing research when we were talking about it, I'm just raising two issues. I'm not opposed to it. One is the idea of clustering. If I've read in other places, and we are not the commercial, the typical resort type area, but I have read that in some places there's a problem with someone will accumulate multiple houses in the immediate vicinity, and they will create kind of a little Airbnb hangout. And I personally wouldn't want my neighborhood to become that type of thing. And I don't know how to regulate that or the answer to it. And the other one is sometimes in the kind of Class B, Class C apartments that we're starting to turn over in other communities, I'm not saying it happened here, owners would sometimes start using the units as short-term rentals versus what you normally think is an apartment. And so I just raise those two issues as things to potentially consider. I don't know the answer to them, but I think they have become problems in other parts of the country. So thank you, appreciate it.
Eric, what was the second part of that again?
In apartments that are kind of waiting to turn over, the owners may start to use them. You can't get decent long-term tenants, and so they will begin to use them as short-term rentals, hoping that at some point they can renovate, rehab them, tear them down, rebuild them, and so they become kind of a short-term rental cluster, and so.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
So with your first comment, the reason we would have a review in 6 months and then 1 year is to look at exactly that. Is somebody coming in, buying up property, whatnot? Because we can always go in and limit the number of permits that somebody could have. I don't know that we have an issue at this point in time with that, because we're not Asheville, we're not New Orleans.
Sure.
We're not that tourist type town. But that would be, the reviews would help us determine, like I said, data-driven decisions that we can and then respond to.
Sure, and I appreciate that. The other thing chasing that is then they put them in different ownerships, and I know the city attorney probably has dealt with every kind of permutation of that, but I just raise it as an issue that I've seen in other places when I was researching it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to that point, it might be interesting that in between that 6 year and 1 year mark, as staff is
6 months.
6 year. The crowd got excited. The 6 month and 1 year mark, that if folks that receive receiving the I'm not going to say the right word now. Not the application permit. Thank you. If they start to see a trend in a given area, that perhaps there's a cap that, okay, if there are 3 or 4 homes in a given that they can start flagging those sorts of things and bringing them forward more proactively.
Yes.
That might be something that we want to ask staff to look at what that mechanism could look like, so that we're alerted on the front end, so that by the time we get to the 6 month mark, we're not like, how did that entire street get on board before we had the opportunity? So, yeah.
Thank you. Hi.
I was checking my timer. Oh, I guess
One
that hasn't
second,
started
sorry.
yet.
Now,
Oh, I'm sorry, you just have 1 minute.
No, that's all right. I'm used to appellate arguments and the clock starting when I get up. My name is Ben Greenberg. I live at 500 John Haywood Way, and I do a home share. And so one thing that I was hoping I could get would be some clarification in the form of a legal memo in terms of how this regulation is going to comply with Senate Bill 483, affecting the Vacation Rental Act. I noticed the city attorney politely corrected you when you were using some terms, what we're really discussing in terms of registration.
Zoning permit.
Yeah, it's a zoning permit. So we're basically calling it something that it's not, when I think we're looking to try to skirt what the General Assembly has tried to tell us, that we don't want patchwork regulations for Airbnb. And so there's going to be litigation on that. And so I would like to have some type of legal memo sort of suggesting why I shouldn't sue, basically, is what I would like on the front end of going there. And then on the other end, I think if there's going to be some type of permitting or use regulation, I feel like home sharing needs to be severed from whole house. I just don't think you can regulate them both the same way and truly make sense, specifically to the point about a total maximum number of days in terms of utilizing a house and moving out of the house. I live there 365 days out of the year, and it feels funny for someone to tell me, who and why I can share that place with. And so it's not going to be a zombified house because I'm living there the entire time. And for my neighbors, maybe they just don't like that I have transient friends that love Raleigh and want to come visit all the time. How are they going to differentiate that between me having to make some money from people going to a wedding at Merriman Wynn? And so I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to have that. And then something that came up that was interesting about the 30 days, if you're asking Airbnb for that information when you're trying to calculate the maximum number of days, if I have a 35-day rental that happens to be on platform, it sounds like what you're saying is you won't be counting that against me in terms of my number of days because that's just a regular tenancy, but you're going to be asking Airbnb for that information. So how are you going to be able to differentiate that from a regulatory standpoint? Because Airbnb is just going to say, he was rented for 35 days when it sounds like what you're saying is that 35 days will be separate and unregulated. And so I think there'd be some important clarification necessary there as well.
Have to ask her.
Yeah, I would love to. I understand we're attacking it from a zoning standpoint.
Well, I can tell you 483 has nothing to do with the regulation of zoning short-term rentals, and that's been clarified in a subsequent bill, which is 160D, and it actually is being litigated now, and it's at the Court of Appeals. So that's a separate safety housing code issue. As far as what's counting, if you don't have a certain number of days, it's not really a problem. You don't go into the short-term rental ordinance if you're renting for 35 days. You would get your zoning permit, which is required for any land use, and that would authorize you to rent it less than 30 days. But whatever you did more than 30 days, the city doesn't have any issue with.
And I understand that, but I believe Councilman Martin suggested getting that information from the platform. The platform's going to tell you that I was rented for those 35 days, even if it was one period. And so I think that could create some confusion for the group in terms of how to regulate that. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because if you're asking them, they're not going to say, oh, well, this one was 35 days. They're just, well, number one, they're probably not going to give you the information in the first place unless you get a warrant. I don't know the answer to that. And then the final point that I wanted to make was with respect to keeping the list for 3 years. If you're keeping that information for some type of criminal activity, it seems the best source to be going after for that information would be the actual platform itself with a proper warrant, as opposed to putting an unnecessary burden, in my opinion, on the homeowner, because then we're keeping a ledger of people that stay when most of the apps and services don't really allow us to go that far back in terms of our information. So I think that's an unnecessary burden on the homeowner. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, Steph Mendel, 3225 Oak Grove Circle. I have two main concerns about the whole house rentals. One is the idea that people, companies, whatever, investors will come in and will buy up a lot of homes. And that doesn't only just lead to zombie houses, it means that houses are then taken off the market. We know we have a housing shortage in Raleigh, especially of affordable housing. And affordable can mean a lot of different things, but a lot of the houses that are being bought up and rented out as whole house are what you might consider affordable, either for somebody to rent or for somebody to buy. And I think taking that housing stock off the market is not a good idea. I don't think that serves the citizens of Raleigh well. I actually share Eric's concern about enclaves of zombie houses and the general concern that, you know, zoning is about predictability. And if I buy a house in a residential neighborhood, I want to assume, I assume that residential activities are going to be happening there, not commercial activities. We do allow short-term rentals of whole houses in a lot of mixed-use districts, and I think the answer is let people who want to rent out whole houses, let them buy those whole houses in mixed-use districts, and then we don't have a problem. It doesn't hurt the neighbors. So anyway, those are my two big concerns: taking housing stock off the market for people who want to live in Raleigh full-time, and you know, turning residential neighborhoods into commercial zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Travis, do we have any idea how many whole house rentals there are in?
We don't have the data on that. No, ma'am.
Is that something we can get from Airbnb?
Potentially. So, the challenge with that is they're but one platform. Again, there are third-party companies that might be able to provide that information for us.
Do we have any reps here from Airbnb or VRBO?
We have VRBO to your left, and I have the Airbnb data that I can pull.
Can we get that info from you? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right. Sorry, and it started all with you.
I can tell you that a few years ago, someone
5
from
years ago.
VRBO, don't start the clock yet because I'm answering her question. A few years ago, someone from VRBO told me that whole house rentals in Raleigh were actually going down, not up. Now that might have changed in the last few years, but it is an interesting data point.
Start the clock now.
Yeah, you hit that button. My name is Greg Stebbin. I live at 1803 White Oak Road. I guess I'm Raleigh's original short-term rental renegade. I was the first person to be cited. I have fought like hell against the city over regulating this. I had a partner in crime sitting over there. She's now the mayor. On December 2nd, 2014, so you can count the years, I was quoted in the News and Observer as making the point that this really is not about beds. It's about business. It's about growth. It's about bringing people here, and we've been very successful at that. You've heard a lot of people say a lot of the guests that they have are people who are moving here, and this is a great way for them to come to Raleigh and make the transition to living here and becoming more great neighbors. And I think we should never lose sight of that, particularly with whole house rentals. We should also never lose sight of the fact that there are some people who are renting their house as a whole house rental when, for instance, they travel for business and things. Someone mentioned that they rented their house as a whole house rental and that covered their mortgage. I rent one room in my house and it covers my mortgage. It's not a whole house rental. I rent one room in my house and it covers my mortgage. And I'm bringing that up for a very important point. Because when you talk about affordable housing, sometimes the most affordable house is the house you're already in. And I think we should be looking at parts of Raleigh and saying, how can we actually help people do short-term rentals so they don't get pushed out of their houses, so they don't get gentrified? That's one of the ways we should be thinking about Airbnb and VRBO. We're actually not villains. These platforms are not threats. They're business opportunities for us. And we should at least look at them that way and see how we can leverage them to our benefit instead of overregulating them.
Hey,
Last thing-
folks, could we cut out the clapping, please? Thank you.
The last thing I want to say is that this issue has been debated by committees, the Planning Commission, the Text Change Committee, the Council for almost 5.5 years. Could I suggest to you as a committee and then to the Council that you put a deadline for yourself in place, and if you don't get this resolved by that deadline, it goes back either to the existing task force or you create a new one, because it's hard to resolve something like this in a few hour-long meetings. It's hard and it's complicated, and we have 5.5 years of lack of success to show for that. So please put a deadline on yourselves with a plan B to make sure this gets done and done well and supports all the things that it can be for Raleigh. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Troublemaker.
Hi, I'm Michael Devley. Midge Hunt and I run Airbnbs. We live at 1570 Atria Circle. So I'd like to say thank you. So the last council was not listening to us, and they got voted out. And the Airbnb forum here heard from all of you people running for election, and we were interested in understanding your position. Clearly, the last council tried to come up with a solution where there wasn't a problem. Now, I think you folks understand that and are listening. So, as you've said, very little problems. You know, we're not here to hurt the community. We're here to be ambassadors. Everyone here feels like they're helping Raleigh. So we appreciate your listening to us and looking to do things that are reasonable, as opposed to in the past where things were just done that appeared to be unreasonable. So we don't favor more enforcement where none is needed. We don't favor caps where none is needed. Really appreciate the, let's take a look at 6 months and a year and see what we've got in place and if there's a problem. And if there's a problem, put a solution in place. But as Greg and others said, this is working it's not working from a council standpoint, but it's working from a community standpoint for most people. So again, thank you for listening to us and coming up with some reasonable proposals, and we hope that you are less obtrusive and more understanding of the folks in this room that are trying to be ambassadors and make Raleigh a great place. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Lindsay Saunders. I live at 5433 Pine Top Circle in Raleigh. I honestly think this draft text doesn't really, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It has to be adjusted based upon the need. For me, it would be homestay. I do my second master suite is listed on Airbnb, but the resources that I use and gain are significantly different than someone who is doing a private entrance or an ADU or a whole house. I do not have an accessory dwelling unit or a private entrance or rental home property, like I said, but I don't have a problem with that. I grew up on the Outer Banks. We had people coming and going all the time to experience the richness of our community. I own and live in a townhouse, which is worth less than $200,000. With 2 master suites, and I rent out the second one to make extra money. It has helped me pay surprise home expenses. You all know that I had shoulder surgery last year, and that really helped me when I had a guest staying with me. Paid on my credit, rebuild savings. I'm trying to leverage what I own as an investment for my now and my future. Honestly, I don't really understand the need to make too much regulation here. You're already getting occupancy tax from us. You already take money from me in the form of occupancy tax. Airbnb collects it, remits its for us, done. My neighbors use their second bedrooms for businesses too. One lady tutors science and math. Another one does music lessons. Her guests park all over the place. And another lady hosts dogs overnight, and I don't care. It's her place. They're respectful. We're responsible.
I like her.
You would like her. I'm not like that, though. I do offer self-check-in, although 9 times out of 10 I'm there to greet people. I set the expectation somewhere around the house. They are my guests and friends for the next few days as long as they stay with me. I made about $5,000 last year off Airbnb. So a $170 permit is a lot based upon how much I'm making. It's kind of been slow for me to start off the year. And also, Section 4 says any resident of the facility, resident manager of the facility. It's not a facility, it's my home. I sat at my dinner table last night talking to my current guest. She came to the U.S. from India to attain her graduate degree at NC State, and she is now getting professional experience at a tech company. She's staying with me for 2 weeks while she's in between leases. And that 2 weeks is almost enough to cover half my mortgage. She told me that she likes Airbnb. We're sitting there at the table last night. I'm reading the news. She's eating dinner. And she says, I told her I'm coming to this meeting tonight. And she says she likes it because it's homier. And she knows the hosts care about the quality of care and the service they provide. I've hosted a Senate page for the General Assembly, the daughter of a single mom, a documentary filmmaker who was originally from North Carolina but came from California to document my 3 winners' story. Oh, well, there's it. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi.
Rob Buckland, 5443 Brandy Bay. We have 2 whole home short-term rentals. We would like there to not be a limit on the number of rental nights. This is not just to make us a little extra money. This is our retirement investment that we put together. Limiting the number of nights would hurt us in paying our bills and the mortgage on our 2 properties. Somebody had mentioned that whole house causes a lot of complaints. But I think you need to realize there are a lot of short-term owners who have helped raise the property values and help their neighbors. We meet and greet every single guest, and these are mostly families visiting Raleigh for numerous reasons. Many of them are wanting to find out if they want to move here. So if you would like to see a 5-star short-term rental and meet our neighbors that are very happy with what we're doing, we can easily arrange that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caroline Kozar. I live at 2000 Traviana Court in Raleigh. So I have a question about the text, and I know it's still the first revision. It's not set in stone yet, but it says that once the text is approved, it's going to have 5 dates to be effective. And so I wanted to see how long the permit process was going to take. If it's going to take 6 months to get a permit, but it's enforced after 5 days, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't want to get in trouble when I'm actively trying to do the right thing. So I just had a, do y'all have an idea of how long a permit will take?
Why don't we address that after?
Okay.
Okay.
And then, I don't know, this is just an idea, if there's any way that y'all could have conversations with any of the big HOA companies. I am 100% loving that you are wanting to like see what happens over the next 6 months and year, but I didn't know, especially how y'all were talking about like the clusters and everything like that, if there's a way for HOAs to say if they are willing to have it or if they're not, if there's certain parts of town that are okay with Airbnbs.
HOAs already make those regulations.
I didn't know if that was something that they could like disclose to the city, if there's, you know, maybe like a list of HOAs can be here and HOAs can't be somewhere else. Is that anything that would be possible?
It's something that's been brought up to me because there's some HOAs that are choosing to allow them, some that are choosing not to, and some that are going about it in different forms. Like maybe the staff person is choosing to not allow it, and then the residents are saying,
Staff
well, that's
person.
not like the HOA. Like there's like if there's like a staff person for the yes. What I'm trying to say is there are different things happening at the HOA level, and I think it is interesting what you're saying to provide potentially a listing of folks that are opting in and opting out. I don't know what that would look like, but it's worth the conversation as we move forward. I've had a number of people. I think it's just worth the messy, yes. So it's worth the conversation of how can HOAs work with us more or less, almost like the registry here of people that are opting into it. Maybe is the easier way. Like, hey, if you're pro Airbnb, let us know so that people that are moving to the city know and can be a part of that when they're looking, if they're wanting to live in an HOA community.
That's something they should ask the HOA, just saying. I don't know. Robin, you deal with this.
Yeah, we don't have any control over that, and usually it's part of a covenant that's actually placed on the land at the time that it's subdivided and developed, and to change that, you usually need a majority of the people of the homeowner. So it's and it's not a city thing, so we can't say require it if you prohibit it. We actually just can't touch it. But I think you're just asking for information, but that's something that, you know, I mean, I guess you could ask them, but they don't have to tell you. But that would be a question if you wanted to do that you should look at your covenants when you look at your house or buy your house. You wouldn't buy a house in a place that didn't allow it, presumably.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my last thing is just about whole house. So I own a whole house rental. I think there's something to be said for you could have I know a lot of people are scared about like bad short-term rentals, but you could have a terrible person for a whole year beside you, or you could have a terrible person and I could get one of my 3 strikes. So I think that the 3-strike rule, I think, is okay based on what people said earlier. It needs to have like more definition to that instead of being so broad. But I'm in favor of whole house and doing like the 6 month or 1 year without a cap on the days.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Dawn Burt. I live at 212 Pogue Street. That's in the University Park neighborhood. And we have a whole house rental as well. Have started it in 2016, and neighbors are very happy with it because our neighborhood is quite mixed. It's lovely, all kinds of ages, college students. And what often happens with small homes, if they do get sold, they're either bought by someone who's going to rent to college students. Again, you're going to have people coming and going. They don't keep up the place, don't keep up the yard, and it just gets often it gets trashy, not to say anything about the students, it's just the homeowners who aren't really keeping it up. The other thing that happens is that they get bought and then a huge 3-story structure goes up and all the trees get cut down on the property. Whereas we've maintained that, it's lovely, it's a great place for people who do need to come, and I also want to oppose the 30-day limit. We had, for instance, people from Australia. The gentleman was doing work with Google and he was able to bring his family and children, and they were able to enjoy the city for 6 weeks instead of, a hotel would have been pretty uncomfortable with kids, or either he would have just not been able to bring them. So I want to speak for extending that 30 days, not being quite so restrictive there. And also the language of transients, I think, is really insulting to visitors who are coming to Raleigh. It's insulting to anyone, really, but that point. And I think that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Khalil D. Thomas, brand new to Airbnb. I live at 6821 Lardane Road in Raleigh, 27613. And I just wanted to really quick make a couple points. One, the reason we decided to turn our full house rental into an Airbnb is that it's a really beautiful, really well-maintained little tiny home in a quiet neighborhood. And I have had renters in the past who have destroyed homes. With an Airbnb, this way I can be personally in and out of it all the time and make sure that it's, being well maintained and not running into any disrepair. I communicate with my neighbors, and I just want to put it out there that I think most of us are very conscientious members of the community. We're doing this as a side to our income, and we are a part of the community. We're not some big business coming in to, run roughshod over the community. I can also say I'm a realtor, and as a realtor, I see a lot of these, I call them big box flippers, coming into our communities, who are, Zillow and all of these places that come in and give folks very low price for the purchase of their home in exchange for the convenience of it. They're taking a lot of equity out of our communities, and that equity is going away to other places in the country. Those homeowners are then not having that equity to reinvest in our communities. I would just like to consider that this committee consider maybe putting some kind of limits on the big companies that are coming into the communities, not necessarily on us little people that are a member parts of the community ourselves, and trying to really maintain the standards. So that's all.
Thank you. Okay, we all talked out? Oh no, you sit down. I got your number. Okay, I'm going to bring this back to the table. So, as I mentioned, literally, this came to the Law and Public Safety Committee 5 years ago, over 5 years ago. I will tell you that we worked on this for 2 months. We had numerous hearings. We had upwards of 200 people come speak, and a very few of them were opposed to long-term rentals, but I had people tell stories that really helped shape my belief on this. I had a couple of, I was going to say seniors, but I'm a senior. So now I'm really upset with myself. But I had some seniors from Boylan Heights come in and say, I have a big house. My taxes have increased substantially. We started doing Airbnb, and we can now afford to pay our taxes. And when they start telling their story about, we start renting our place, and now it's fun. We have people in the house. It reduces loneliness and blah, blah, blah. So hearing those stories, I thought the folks who were telling these stories were all here to oppose it. Instead, they were like, no, this has really changed our lives for the better. We had one woman come and talk about, she was she was in an accident and disabled, and said she wouldn't have been able to keep her home if she didn't have Airbnb income to fall back on. We had another gentleman who said that he would rent out his full house, but he had a basement apartment. And so he would stay in the basement apartment or vice versa. And he talked about how that was the way he was able to afford to even buy the house. So, there is an issue of housing affordability in some communities that are very tourist related, but the stories that we heard were from people who said, this is what enables me to keep my house. In fact, I see one woman in the audience who actually has suffered a disability and rents her place, and we talked during the campaign. She said, I wouldn't be able to keep my house if I couldn't do this. So having said that, Travis, question. For the timing on a permit, would we set this up so the text change goes into effect and then people have X amount of days to get a permit? How would you recommend that?
So the way that any rule works is you pass an ordinance and it becomes effective on a certain day. And at that point, that's when people can come to the city and apply for a permit. So once you're at the point of application and you're trying to gain a permit, there's no enforcement that generally happens. You just go through the permitting system, and then if you meet the requirements, you get a permit.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to make a motion. Travis, are you looking for a motion to move forward with a text change, or do you want some specific changes? There's some specific changes I want to see.
So it would be helpful to hear the specific changes.
Okay. All right. So the first one would be to repeal the homestay regulations and replace with the short-term rentals that you have outlined. Couple of things. I would like to see you come back with a more, say, equitable fee for the zoning permit. I would like to see the accessory dwelling unit removed from I. Clarification on cooking facilities. Could we change the word transient to maybe visitor? And also clarification of the citation. So for the 3 strikes and you're out rule, that the rules apply to instances where a renter or user is involved with the violation. So in other words,
Do you want me to tell you what they are that are in there now, because they're just statutes?
Huh?
Right now, the offenses are actually felonies, statutes. I didn't know if you knew that. There's just numbers of statutes. And one of them is like, a sex offender and that type of thing. So,
No, that's not what I was talking about.
oh, okay.
What I was talking about was I saw that. What I'm saying is we have a woman here who her dog escaped. That was the citation. So, but that had nothing to do with the Airbnb host.
Yeah, I was just saying that's not in our list. It might help if you had a list of each thing so you knew what they were, because I don't think that would be caught by this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do one or the other one. I wanted to make sure that you knew each thing. Some of them are.
Do you want to read those?
One of them has to
too
do
long?
with the no. It's noise, nuisance, sex offenders, alcohol violations, possession of stolen goods, and gambling.
Okay.
And a zoning violation. Now, that zoning violation, is pretty broad. It could be any kind of a zoning violation. It's in the same 365-day period. But I did want to make sure, because I had to think myself, I had to go back and go, what are these statutes? So I wanted to see if those are things that you're talking about, or you want to say it has to be related to short-term rental, or do you want to leave it in?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Then somebody isn't being cited for something unreasonable.
That's the list.
Yeah.
So the only thing I would say, that wouldn't be a dog running loose. There are a lot of different kinds of zoning violations that you could have that were unrelated to that, but you'd have to have 3 in 1 year, which I think is. And the other thing it says is that you have to have it has to go through the judicial process. It's not just you're cited, you have to actually be found guilty, if you will. So those are the things that are in there right now.
Okay, I get it. All right, then, never mind the clarification of the citation. I would also like to ask for a review in 6 months and 1 year from the date that this is approved by council. And then to Sage's point as well, if we see any trends that are developing, we would ask that the staff, this wouldn't be part of the ordinance, but we would just ask staff to proactively monitor this and alert us of any trends that you think we should know about, whether it's corporations buying property, clusters emerging, or 2 houses even emerging in an area. You know, just so we are on top of that and we can take steps if needed. That's my motion. On what? No caps on the amount. Well, the thing is,
Can we put a
I
cap of 6 months, and then we would still have the opportunity of reviewing it in 6 months?
I'm sorry, David.
I would support this if we had a cap on whole house rentals of 6 months, and then we can review it in 6 months, and then we could remove the cap at that time if we decide it's okay. But to go forward without a cap, I would have to say that I cannot support this.
Okay. I can't support a cap at this point. In 6 months, I might, if I saw trends that were disturbing.
Yeah, and
I
that's
would-
what I was asking was what I heard from the group and from staff is that caps are nearly impossible for us to enforce. And so that's why I think that working on the back end to, like, we can put things into process during the review periods and work from a policy standpoint at that point to say, okay, in 6 months, we've got an issue, right? Like if we're putting the checks and balances in on the back end by saying, staff, we need this data, come back to us in 6 months, or we need a trend analysis. And if you're seeing
Right.
these things come to us before the 6 months or 1 year, then I don't feel like we need the caps in place at this point, but we need to be open to the fact that we could put caps in place should trends become very apparent at a later date.
Right.
So the issue that was in San Francisco, like, I don't think a 300-day cap that you're required there doesn't seem to make sense in this case.
At this point in
Yeah.
time.
Correct.
But 6 months before we make that,
Yes.
or a year.
If the trend is
Or
there, then
train.
that's one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Counselor Cox, I wish you would support this with the understanding we will look
I
at
would
this
love
at
to.
6
I would
months.
love to support it, but I'd like to put the cap in place today because that's what I hear from my constituents.
Okay. All right, so I have made a motion. Travis, do you got it?
Second.
Okay. That has been seconded by Counselor Martin. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, so that's a 3-1 vote. And just, Counselor Cox, we will be looking at this, and if there's trends or whatnot to indicate that we should look at a cap, open to that. So I think we all are. So, okay.
Clarification, Your Honor. We are keeping the item in committee for now, just reporting this portion out.
Oh, no, we're moving.
The whole thing not, the whole thing goes.
Yeah,
Just want to make sure.
okay.
Thank you.
We're ready. No applause, but thank you. I know this has been a long haul, everybody. Greg. 5.5 years later.
I see it.
Yeah.
Fair.
Thank you, everybody.
Do we have any idea when our next meeting is going to be?
Oh, I do not. It will be, our next meeting will be in March. You have a hard stop.
Yeah.
Right.
About 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, I hear you. Let me get back to you on that. Okay. Everybody, thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Be safe.